95% of Americans are unaware of the dollar's hidden collapse. Emily's heart raced as she stared at her computer screen, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering. The numbers danced before her eyes, glowing like ominous warnings. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Each line of data revealed a troubling trend, a pattern that whispered of disaster. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of responsibility crush her chest. As an accountant in the quiet town of Maplewood, she had dedicated herself to making sense of chaos, but now chaos was rising from her spreadsheets. Her thoughts turned to her son, Jake, and her father, who needed her more than ever. The thought of their lives unraveling sent a shiver down her spine. She couldn't let them down. Yet there was a dreadful moral dilemma clawing at her conscience. If she confronted her brother Kyle, who believed the market would simply correct itself, what would it cost her family? Loyalty to him tugged at her, but her convictions begged her to speak out. She had seen what panic did to people, the way it spread through a community like wildfire. Would she risk everything to warn them, or keep quiet and protect her relationships? Emily glanced at the clock. The office was quiet. She was alone. Every anxious heartbeat echoed in her ears. Would anyone believe her if she tried to shout the truth? She felt more than fear. She felt desperation gnawing at the edges of her resolve. What if sharing her findings led to nothing but anger and resentment? She just wanted to protect her family and keep her father's dignity intact, even as his memory faltered. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. Back in the office, her eyes narrowed as anxiety mingled with determination. She couldn't shake the feeling that she needed help. Gripped by urgency, she turned to Mr. Thompson, the retired economics professor who ran the local donut shop. Watching his calm resolve in discussions often gave her a flicker of hope. He had a way of breaking down complex ideas into digestible truths. Preparing to meet him was the only choice that made sense. She needed guidance, a mentor who could help her articulate this impending doom. But as she approached the meeting with him, every confidence she had was consumed by self-doubt. Tension coiled in her gut as she rehearsed her thoughts, each sentence fading to noise in her mind. What if she was wrong? What if she caused unnecessary panic? The world around her began to fade. All she could see were the numbers, the predictions, threatening the very foundation of their lives. Then Saturday arrived. The community meeting echoed with voices and skepticism. Her palms were clammy, her heart thrumming as she prepared to connect the dots, a flicker of resolve igniting from within. But a sudden fire alarm pierced the air, shrill and frantic, ripping through the moment of truth. The crowd surged toward the exits, and Emily stood frozen, thoughts racing as chaos erupted around her. This was her chance to reclaim her voice and warn them all. But in the confusion, she was lost, trapped between the urgency of her findings and the panic consuming everyone around her. Would she gather the strength to rise above the panic, or would fear silence her when she needed to speak the most? The chaos intensified, a cacophony of shouts and footsteps blending into a single overwhelming sound. Emily's heart raced, the urgent pounding a steady reminder of her purpose. She saw people pushing through the exits, fear etched on their faces, oblivious to the storm brewing beyond the physical space of their meeting. In that dizzying moment, Emily felt small yet resolute. Clenching her fists, she recalled her discussions with Mr. Thompson, who, with a calm voice, had said, "Courage often finds its way through chaos." Trusting that advice, she knew she had to push forward. But how? How could she draw attention in a sea of panic without drowning in the rush herself? Battling through the throng, she found an elevated platform where she could see and be seen. Her body trembled as she climbed the stairs. each step a question against her self-doubt. What if no one listened? What if her words fell on deaf ears, absorbed by the currents of hysteria? "Listen!" she shouted, the sound betraying the deep fray of fear beneath her confident facade. The crowd continued to surge, but a few heads turned. It wasn't enough, not yet. She took a deep breath, focusing her scattered thoughts. "I have important information. We are facing a financial crisis that many do not see. Ignoring the numbers could cost us everything." There was a hesitance, an awkward pause that felt as heavy as lead. Eyes narrowed in skepticism, whispers and murmurs passed through the crowd. They were still processing the fire alarm, not her claims. Emily could feel the unyielding pressure of judgment building like a wall against her. Did she dare press further? Then she remembered Jake and her father. The fleeting image of her son's innocent smile ignited something inside her, a fierce protective instinct that spurred her words forward. "People are unaware of the hidden collapse of our dollar. I've seen the figures that show this downturn isn't just a temporary dip. This isn't panic, this is responsibility." With every sentence, she drew in a bit more of their attention. The crowd began to stabilize, faces turning towards her, expressions shifting from confusion. She focused on the numbers in her head, summoning all the analyses she had prepared with Mr. Thompson. Even amidst the noise, she could share logical insights that explained the unfolding disaster. The flicker of interest turned into an ember of trust as she elaborated on her findings. She explained the specific trends, using her background in accounting to break down complex statistics into comprehensible parts. As her voice steadied, she appeared more convincing, not just a woman in panic, but an informed mother determined to protect her loved ones. But she could feel their doubts lingering. Would they see through her newfound confidence? The reality of her family's potential financial devastation hung heavily in her mind. Surely it wasn't enough to speak, she needed to prove her sincerity. With a last burst of courage, she declared, "If I'm wrong, then at least I'll have tried. But if I'm right, and all signs indicate that I am, now is the time to take action before it's too late." A ripple of whispers surged through the room, some heads nodding, others shaking. A chance. The moment transformed into a doorway. Either she would be dismissed as a foolish alarmist, or perhaps, just perhaps, her words would take root. Suddenly, from the back of the crowd, Kyle's familiar figure emerged. He sauntered toward her, an expression of arrogance masking concern. "What are you doing, Em? Spreading fear doesn't help anyone." The confrontation unfurled before her like a sudden storm. This was it, the moment she had both dreaded and anticipated. It wasn't just her findings at stake, it was her relationship with her brother, a choice that could shatter familial bonds or lead them toward a unified purpose. The truth lay raw between them, sculpting an unexpected battleground. As she took a breath and prepared for the confrontation, she felt a surge of determination. This wasn't merely about proving her point. This was about everything she held dear. "Let's settle this once and for all," she said, meeting his gaze with unwavering strength. The time had come to face the truth. Emily's breath hitched as she sensed the tension escalating. Kyle's piercing blue eyes were a mirror of her own resolve, but infused with skepticism. The crowd's energy shifted, giving weight to the unfolding confrontation. She couldn't back down. This was about her credibility, her family's future, and the integrity of her message. "Kyle, this isn't fear. It's reality." She injected steadiness into her tone, fighting the tremor that threatened to betray her confidence. "People need to hear this. We can't afford to ignore the signs. Ignorance won't protect us from what's coming." Kyle's mouth twisted in irritation. "You think you have all the answers? What makes you so sure you're right?" The question reverberated through her mind, amplifying her insecurities. Accusations swirled around the room, testing her resolve further. What if he was right? What if her answers didn't solve anything? Yet she remembered the weight of her statistical analysis, the late nights spent aligning her findings, and the faces of her family. They were worth the risk. "I've gathered data from multiple sources," Emily asserted, adopting a commanding presence. "You can't cover up reality with denial. The dollar's devaluation is real, and we're on a precipice. Denial doesn't reform the truth." She braced herself against Kyle's skeptical response, and the crowd's collective breath masked the chaos outside. There was a palpable shift as silence washed over them. Kyle crossed his arms, his defiance fading slightly as he contemplated his sister's words. "So what do you propose we do?" That was the crux. This was not merely about awareness. It required action, collaboration, and a strategy. She needed to turn this moment to her advantage. "Let's organize and prepare," she urged, her voice gathering strength. "We need to address our savings, make informed decisions, and find collective solutions to hedge against this financial storm. You're part of this, Kyle. We can't stand divided on this." The urgency in her plea resonated, slowly transforming disbelief into consideration. Yet she understood that persuasion would demand more than just logical reasoning. It had to connect at a deeper level: personal stakes, familial bonds, and shared responsibility. After a long, tense silence, Kyle finally softened. "Maybe you're onto something, but I need to see the evidence, Em. If you want to lead this, you have to show everyone why they should follow you." The challenge lodged in her mind like a splinter. To lead meant she would have to put her analytical skills on full display. She needed to collate her findings, share her methods, and illuminate the very facts that might convince others of her claims. Perhaps, at that moment, she began to recognize her hidden competency, a leader emerging from the chaos. I'll bring everything I've researched," Emily asserted resolutely. "But we can't wait until it's too late. I need your support, Kyle. Share this message, engage with the family. Let them know this isn't about fear, but about protecting ourselves." The crowd began to murmur again, debating amongst themselves. The barrier of judgment began to crack as heads turned to each other in dialogue. Emboldened by their timid questions, Emily sensed enthusiasm starting to build. As she continued to speak, she wove the narrative of responsibility, grounding her assertions in urgency and opportunity for collective growth. She could feel herself becoming the person she had always aspired to be: assertive, trustworthy, a beacon of knowledge amidst the uncertainty. But uncertainty gripped her just as tightly. Could she maintain this momentum? Would the same people who had doubted her step forward now? The atmosphere shifted yet again when a voice rang out from the crowd. "And what guarantee do we have that this isn't just a ploy?" Each word was a sharp knife against her newfound confidence. The moment hung thick in the air, and Emily felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders, demanding results. "Trust isn't built in an instant," she spoke slowly, deliberately. "But I will build that trust, step by step. I will prove the truth of these looming threats, both to you and to myself." The stakes had never been higher. As the quiet buzz of cautious optimism circled her, she realized the magnitude of her task had expanded beyond merely highlighting the darkness. It was now about crafting the path through it. The shadow of doubt loomed large, but it also fueled her resolve. The emerging leader was just beginning to form inside her. She took a moment to absorb the sea of faces before her, eager yet apprehensive. But one thought turned like a whirlwind in her mind. What if she became what she feared, held back by the crushing weight of expectations? "Will you join me on this journey?" she declared, and as the crowd's hopeful murmurs filled her ears, she had ignited something monumental, a flicker of unity forging a way through the storm. Yet new challenges loomed just ahead. What would it mean to confront those who might actively sabotage her efforts? The room vibrated with the beginning of a movement. the kind where scattered ideas had the potential to coalesce into action. All that stood in her way were the shadows of doubt and the obstructive forces yet to appear. The moment of truth was approaching, and she felt its urgency peel back layers of her own lingering fears. Would she shake off the shackles of uncertainty? Would she lead boldly into the fray? Ahead lay possibilities, but also dread, power struggles, and a truth she may not yet be ready to confront. Would she rise or fall into the shadows cast by her own fears? Emily left the gathering, her mind racing. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. But as she stepped into the cool night air, there was an exhilarating undertone to her anxiety. For the first time, she felt both the possibility of change and the volatility that came with it. The sharp echoes of her speech lingered in her ears, words of preparation and trust. She had sparked something within herself, a conviction that she had always yearned to feel. Despite her burgeoning confidence, an undercurrent of apprehension tapped at her resolve. What if she couldn't deliver on her promise? What if her meticulous research fell flat in the eyes of those she sought to convince? Alone in her dimly lit apartment, the walls seemed to close in. Emily's heart raced as she rummaged through piles of papers scattered across her desk, searching for clarity among the chaos that cluttered her thoughts. Each statistic she had gathered whispered potential solutions, but they also demanded presentation, an articulation of complexity simplified enough to resonate with others. She began to compile a presentation, but as the hours ticked by, self-doubt floated in like a dense fog. What if her arguments weren't as airtight as she believed? What if they misinterpreted her intentions? With a deep breath, she resolved to step beyond her current limitations. She had to connect, not just through facts and figures, but through compelling narrative, engaging storytelling, and persuasive techniques. The more she invested in her presentation, the more she realized she needed not just to share data, but to cultivate emotional connections that would inspire action. People rally around stories, not spreadsheets. As daylight broke the next morning, Emily felt recharged. She drew on her background in psychology, an awareness of human behavior, as a tool. She had learned how to identify what motivated people, what scared them, and most importantly, how to frame a compelling case that resonated. She needed to humanize the statistics, placing them in real-world contexts that illustrated the imminent dangers and opportunities. She started with personal anecdotes, weaving in stories about families who would be impacted by financial missteps. Would Kyle's family stand to lose everything? Would their savings evaporate in a blink? By grounding her narrative in specific consequences, she could evoke visceral responses, pushing her audience toward the urgency she felt in her bones. However, her internal struggles were far from over. Each time she practiced her delivery, she stumbled over her words, recalling the skeptical faces from the night before. She stopped, closed her eyes, and visualized each person in the crowd, friends, family, contemplating her words. Their futures were tied to her message. That understanding infused her with a new tenacity. By that evening, her presentation had transformed from bullet points into a compelling narrative. The moment of truth had arrived again. She would present to her family the next day, an intimate audience with the potential for monumental impact. But as she prepared to rest, an unsettling thought crept in. What if her efforts to garner support fell flat, further entrenching the divisions she attempted to mend? What if, despite her best intentions, she inadvertently triggered resistance instead of cooperation? Despite her preparations, she was gripped by the possibility of conflict, the looming threat of dissent as she took the stage. Emily had never been one to shy away from tough conversations, but this felt particularly daunting. What if the shadows of doubt she had faced in the past become a reality? Tomorrow she would face her family and reveal her plans. If only she could ensure they understood the risks at stake, the urgency for collective action. Her heart raced with anticipation and dread. As she lay in bed, the darkness weighing on her eyelids, one question resounded in her mind. Would she emerge as the leader they needed, or would she falter when it counted the most? Emily woke up to a piercing sunlight that forced its way through the curtains. She lay still for a moment, grappling with the recurring dread that cloaked her thoughts. The clock ticked relentlessly, reminding her that today was the day. With determination overriding her apprehension, she swung her legs out of bed and planted her feet on the floor. The cool surface invigorated her, and she decided to harness that energy into her final preparations. She spent the next few hours reviewing her notes meticulously, refining her anecdotes, ensuring that each layer added depth to her argument rather than confusion. She rehearsed in front of the bathroom mirror, her reflection becoming both her audience and her critic. Each word that flowed from her mouth was a confrontation with her fears. Would they receive her message with open minds, or would they hold on to their skepticism like a life raft? As she moved through her day, the moments leading up to the gathering increasingly felt like climbing to the precipice of a high cliff. She was acutely aware of her surroundings. Each conversation around her became a reminder of the stakes involved. At lunch, she absent-mindedly stirred her coffee, the swirling liquid mirroring the jumbled thoughts in her mind. What if she stumbled? What if she faltered in this crucial moment? Her heart raced as she battled the whispering doubts. By afternoon, Emily was no stranger to the anticipated strain of her family's potential reactions. Each member held differing perspectives shaped by their experiences. Some would embrace her ideas, while others would challenge them fiercely. This clash of opinions both fueled her anxiety and ignited her resolve. This was not just about delivering information, it was about emerging from the shadows of past failures, about establishing herself as an influential voice among her family. With each passing hour, the weight of responsibility morphed into an empowering force. Emily realized how important this moment was for her growth, not just as a communicator, but as a leader within her own family. She could sense the shift within herself. She was no longer an anxious participant awaiting approval, but a determined advocate ready to instigate change. As Emily dressed, she carefully chose her outfit, a deep blue dress that radiated professionalism and confidence. In the mirror, the reflection conveyed strength, and she embraced it. With a final glance, she whispered affirmations to herself, reminding her of the potential impact of her words. The power of vulnerability became apparent. Sharing her findings and stories could provoke thoughts, discussions, and perhaps even a shift in understanding among her family. The meeting place was a modest dining room, filled with familiar faces whose expressions ranged from casual interest to skeptical anticipation. The atmosphere was charged, thick with the weight of expectations. As they settled in, Emily felt the absorbed energy illuminating her resolve. This was not merely a presentation. This was an invitation to understand, to grow, and perhaps to unify in purpose. She took a deep breath, opening her laptop to a blank screen filled with potential. The first words slipped out, tentative yet increasingly assured. She began to share the personal stories that intertwined with her data, framing the statistics within a context her family could grasp. Each story elicited the responses she sought, a mix of surprise, concern, and engagement. Just as Emily began to build momentum, her father furrowed his brow, interrupting her narrative with a pointed. The tension in the room shifted, instantly drawing her focus. She had touched a nerve. "Emily, statistics can be manipulated. What makes you think this is more than a fear tactic?" Her heart raced, gripped by the weight of that challenge. In that moment, everything hinged on her response. Would she shy away, or would she embrace this confrontation as an opportunity to solidify her stance? Confidence flickered within her, and she steadied herself. As she met his gaze, she felt a powerful surge of responsibility and determination. The moment to confront not just her father's doubts, but her own insecurities had arrived. "Because we can't afford to ignore the implications," Emily countered, ready to dive deeper into the complexity of her findings, unearthing not only data, but also the passion that drove her to share this message. At that moment, she understood that every interaction going forward could shape her narrative, not just for the evening, but for the future she longed to influence. Would she rise to the occasion, or would she retreat again into the safety of silence? The air thickened with anticipation. Each eye was on her, and every second felt like an eternity as she prepared to ultimately define her role, not just as a daughter, but as a leader. The air crackled with tension as Emily faced her father's piercing gaze. His doubt hung in the room like a thick fog, threatening to obscure the path she had meticulously crafted. Taking another deep breath, Emily grounded herself in the reality of her mission. This wasn't just about presenting data, it was about redefining her identity within the family and wrestling with her own insecurities. "You think I'm trying to manipulate emotions, don't you?" she pressed, a hint of challenge in her voice. Instead of recoiling, she leaned into the discomfort, the edges of her nervousness sharpening her focus. "I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm here because I believe in the importance of understanding what we're up against." "Fear tactics work for sensationalists, not for serious discussions," he countered, his tone unwavering. In that moment, doubt flooded Emily again, a familiar companion she had fought so hard to silence. Yet instead of allowing it to consume her, she chose to confront it directly. "I've spent months researching this, Dad," she implored, the urgency in her voice rising. She locked eyes with each family member, daring them to engage. "These statistics reflect a reality that affects us all, and we can't afford to stay ignorant." The conversation that followed felt like crossing a tightrope. Each step was precarious, but also exhilarating. Her points were met with a swirl of questions and hesitations. As she answered, she sensed her initial hesitation dissolving into a steadfast resolve. She cited research studies and expert opinions, drawing connections that made the data personal and relevant. Engagement blossomed, shifting the atmosphere from skepticism to curiosity. It was as if her father's challenge had ignited a fire within her, prompting her to dig deeper into her arguments and bolster them with the convictions she had only just begun to uncover. She spoke from a well of emotion, connecting her family's past struggles to the present challenges. It was in these moments that Emily felt her own voice gaining strength. Every word brought forth her power not only as an advocate, but as a daughter. But the dialogue didn't solely take shape through her arguments. It was a push and pull, a dance of ideas and beliefs. As her brother interjected, offering his counterpoints, Emily welcomed the challenge. Sharpening her responses, she outlined the potential consequences of ignorance. Each rebuttal embraced the crux of her resolve, exploring the uncomfortable spaces that could lead to growth. Yet, beneath the exterior of composure, her mind raced. Was she really articulating her ideas effectively, or were they just words spinning in air? Despite the tentative applause that followed her most compelling stories, internal doubts clawed at her. She had never imagined that this confrontation with her family could also be a magnifying glass for her own vulnerabilities. As the pacing of their conversation quickened, Emily took a calculated risk, expanding the data to include the experiences of those outside their family circle. Consider our friends, our colleagues. Are they aware of how deeply the currents of these statistics affect their daily lives? The shift in focus drew her audience in, rallying them towards the heightened stakes laid bare before them. Then a subtle shift occurred, a silent awareness that began to ripple across the room. When her mother finally spoke up, supporting Emily's perspectives with her own insights, it felt as if a collective weight lifted. "The only way we can learn is through openness," her mother urged, linking arms with Emily's mission. It was a profound acknowledgement that echoed in Emily's heart, fortifying her resolve. Yet, as she saw seeds of understanding begin to take root within her family, Emily realized with a jolt that this was only the beginning. The journey ahead would require not just courage, but ongoing dialogue, an integration of conflicting views and harmonizing their differences into a coherent understanding. Awareness sparked a realization. What if this gathering was just one step in a larger transformation? She was standing at the precipice of not just personal growth, but a potential shift in familial dynamics. Would every discussion that followed become a chance to define her place, not only as a daughter, but a force to be reckoned with? The moment still hung in the air, filled with unresolved questions and escalating excitement. Just as more debates emerged, a flash of inspiration struck Emily. She sensed that profound discovery was just within grasp. "Maybe this dialogue is only the surface," she said, her voice threaded with newfound conviction. "What if we create a space for each of us to express our concerns, our hopes? We could start an ongoing conversation." And as she voiced that potential, she felt not just a fear of the unknown, but excitement for the journey ahead. What began as a confrontation transitioned into the seed of something larger, an evolving dialogue, rich with possibilities, where her voice could continually find ways to merge with and challenge her family's beliefs. Was she ready to take this leap into uncharted territory? The challenge to facilitate growth through shared dialogue lay before her, and with it, the heart-pounding potential to redefine her role entirely. As the clock ticked on, the next chapter remained unwritten, waiting for her to take that decisive step. Would she embrace the opportunity to expand this dialogue into something lasting? The realization of what she had set in motion hung in the air like unspent electricity, each family member's gaze a testament to the unfolding narrative of growth. As her words faded, Emily felt an invigorating rush. This was more than a discussion, it was a pivotal moment of transformation. But the lingering uncertainties and the weight of the expectations pressed against her. How would she manage not just the dialogue at hand, but the continuity of these discussions in the future? The evening stretched onward, and the air shifted. Each conversation echoed in her mind as she considered the implications of making room for others' voices, particularly those who had walked through darker paths before her. It dawned on her that her father's skepticism was rooted in his own fear of vulnerability. His call for seriousness over sensationalism resonated, yet how could she show him that their concerns were as real as the data she was presenting? Emily resolved to embrace this tension. Taking a sip of water, she prepared to set a structured framework for future conversations, envisioning a family gathering every month dedicated to topics that mattered. They could establish rules, ensuring everyone felt safe, respected, and heard. But the thought of dictating such a format filled her with dread. What if it felt too rigid or artificial? She needed to find a balance between guiding the discussions and allowing natural, organic exploration of ideas to flourish. "Would you all be open to a regular dialogue?" Emily asked, her voice steady despite the quiver within. "I mean, not just about me sharing data, but a chance for each of us to explore themes together? Maybe we could invite community experts or even listen to podcasts that challenge our perspectives." Her proposal hung momentarily in the air, cresting anticipation. Her brother raised an eyebrow, intrigued but visibly skeptical, while her father seemed to weigh the suggestion carefully, the hint of a frown on his brow. "That sounds idealistic, Ness," he finally replied, using the nickname that linked her to her childhood. "But how can we ensure that it remains productive? Discussions can degenerate into arguments if not handled delicately." It was a reasonable concern, yet it struck Emily like a challenge. She had felt the friction before, recognized the breakdown of understanding when emotions eclipsed logical discourse. By setting clear intentions, she proposed, her confidence fortifying with each "We can agree on a topic ahead of time, focusing our energy on understanding rather than convincing one another. Let's commit to listening as much as speaking." The quiet exchange around the room pulsed with latent energy. Emily locked eyes with her mother, who offered a reassuring nod, injecting hope into the resolution. "All right, I'm in," her brother conceded. "But if we're doing this, I want us to dig deep. No fluff." That was exactly the kind of commitment Emily needed, an openness grounded in sincerity. She could hardly suppress a smile. If they were to embark on this journey together, it would require not just her resolve, but an active collective effort to engage meaningfully. Yet the contours of her ambition clashed with the reality of her personal fears. What if she faltered in sustaining these dialogues? Fear threatened to creep back in, whispering the old narratives of inadequacy. It was her father who broke the tension again, his voice thick with deliberation. "I admire your determination, Emily. Just remember that growth comes from discomfort, and sometimes we must embrace that discomfort rather than shield ourselves from it." That resonated deeply. She felt it echo beyond familial dynamics, striking at the core of her personal journey. She had often shielded herself, fearing confrontation, but now was precisely the moment to embrace it, not just with her family, but in her professional life as well. Colleagues at work would challenge her ideas too, but all the while, Emily was redefining not just her familial role, but the very nature of her career as an advocate. "Let me take the lead on structuring our first session," Emily said, her voice tinged with newfound assertiveness. "We can meet next week, and I'll prepare an outline." The collective acceptance buzzed around her, igniting a fire she hadn't expected to feel. This was not merely about confronting her father or proving herself. It was about unlocking potential, choosing to lead while also learning from those around her. As the meeting dissolved into small talk, Emily's mind raced with thoughts of how to cultivate this newfound commitment. The vision of their conversations proliferated in her imagination, expanding to include not just family, but friends and neighbors whose voices had yet to be heard in any important dialogue. In that vibrant moment, a more daring question took root within her. What if this sparked a larger change in how they interacted with the world? The pulse of ambition surged again, rekindling her initial determination, but now draped in collaborative potential. Emily smiled knowingly, realizing that this path was as much personal as it was familial. What doors might this newly formed resolve open? And could she transform herself from an uncertain participant into a skillful architect of connection? Yet as she found herself drifting back to practicalities, there lingered a gnawing thrill, a whisper of doubt about the challenges ahead. Would she stand strong when faced with resistance, not just from her family, but also from the external world? As her heart thudded with the rhythm of new possibilities, she recognized the undeniable truth. The real work was just beginning, and she was ready to meet whatever came next with unwavering clarity. What awaited her beyond their family discussions? A confrontation with the very notions she had once avoided? Would she now confront those outside her home, ready to wield the strength she was discovering in herself? Meeting with her family confirmed her resolve, but now she found herself back at work, grappling with the daunting prospect of bringing this newfound leadership into her professional realm. Could she replicate this atmosphere of open dialogue amidst colleagues who thrived in the rigid structures of corporate hierarchies? The very thought sent a tremor of anxiety through her, but under that anxiety simmered a pulse of determination. Monday dawned, and as the fluorescent lights flickered overhead in the conference room, she positioned herself at the head of the table. Her heart galloped. This was not just a meeting. This was an opportunity to transform the established norms of silence and apprehension that had stifled her voice in the past. She wasn't leading a family discussion, but rather guiding a corporate narrative, a paramount challenge. As the meeting commenced, Emily surveyed the faces around the table. Some were engaged, others distracted, and a few wore defensive expressions. In her hands, she grasped a notepad filled with notes that outlined her thoughts, but she refrained from diving headfirst into her prepared script. Instead, she took a deep breath, grounding herself in the lessons learned from her family discussions. They had embraced discomfort. Perhaps she could too. "Thanks for gathering, everyone. I know it's a busy week, but I think we must delve into some issues impacting our outreach initiatives," Emily began, her voice steady. "I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts and encourage a more open conversation today." A brief silence ensued, and then her boss, Peter, spoke up. "Are you suggesting we just talk it over casually, Emily? We have objectives to meet." His tone danced between skepticism and authority, and Emily felt her resolve tighten against a wave of doubt. This isn't about casualness, Peter. Our objectives can be better supported through great ideas, and great ideas emerge when everyone feels comfortable to share. The words tumbled from her mouth, a mixture of sass and courage she didn't know she could wield. Yet inside, she caught the undercurrents of her own discomfort. Was she crossing lines? Would she invite backlash? The room buzzed with low murmurs, some voicing agreement, while others shared furtive, cautious glances. Emily seized the momentum. Let's break out into smaller groups and discuss how we feel our current strategies resonate with our audience. Maybe we can discover discrepancies that we need to address. Reluctantly, they began to whisper among themselves, dissecting outreach strategies. Emily immersed herself in the conversations, listening intently. Comments emerged about how initiatives felt disconnected from community needs, a direct critique that made her heart race, yet exhilaration flickered beneath the niggling anxiety. This was a pivotal moment for her, an invitation to confront what had felt detrimental for too long. Then she overheard someone mention how some marketing tactics appeared to marginalize certain demographics, and a sense of indignation flared within her. "Yes," she injected, her voice ringing out like a clarion call. "We must challenge ourselves to understand not just our metrics, but the narratives behind them. If we're not attuned to these voices, we're essentially perpetuating the disconnect." The room shifted as her colleagues began to lean into the conversation, some nodding along to her points. An unexpected thrill surged through Emily. This was her world, the intersection of personal growth and collective responsibility. She could harness this atmosphere, shaping it while promoting a culture of belonging and inclusion. But did she possess the stamina to follow through? As the meeting concluded, she felt tentative triumph, and a snicker of dread began to curl in her stomach. It had been invigorating, yet she faced the raw truth. Leading beyond familial circles proved to be an even larger tidal wave than she anticipated. There would be resistance, and not all her colleagues would be willing to embrace this shift. What if they resented her for challenging the status quo? Could she sustain the energy to keep these conversations alive, actively listening and guiding when pushback arose? Her mind raced with the weight of the responsibility she was beginning to shoulder. With her heart pounding, Emily stood up, resolved that she would not retreat into the shadows of her uncertainty. As she gathered her things and left the room, a new idea rolled through her mind. What if she invited her colleagues to share their own stories in the upcoming weeks? A segment dedicated to personal experiences could galvanize connection and empathy. Nothing would come easy. She had learned that much in her family discussions. But with each step forward, she felt a stirring conviction that she was crafting something powerful, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. The cracks were beginning to show in the facade of her previous self that avoided discomfort at all costs. Could she truly engage successively with this challenge? In those exhilarating moments, she caught a glimpse of the truth that lay ahead, which would challenge the very foundation of her professional life. Would she have the fortitude to navigate the trepidation ahead, transforming not just her environment, but also her own perception of leadership? Emily's determination carried her through the week that followed, but each day felt increasingly daunting. Ideas swirled in her mind, yet they were tangled with the fear of rejection and the harsh reality of corporate inertia. As Friday approached, she wrestled with doubt. Sticking her neck out might warrant unyielded scrutiny. But she had made a promise to herself. This time, she wouldn't back down. The day began with a familiar routine. She settled into her desk, reviewing the notes she had taken during the initial meeting, readying herself for the next round of discussion. It wouldn't be just another routine check-in. It had to break through the haze of routine complacency. Gone were the days of being merely compliant. She was determined to give voice to the undercurrents of discontent running through her team. As employees filed into the conference room, Emily felt a drumbeat of urgency quicken in her chest. Transformative change demanded honesty, but how could she guide her colleagues to embrace that honesty without fear? "Thanks for coming, everyone," she started, her voice stronger than she felt. "I thought we could build on our last meeting. I've been thinking about personal narratives and how they influence our strategies." Peter, sitting at the front, eyed her skeptically. "Personal stories? This is a workplace, Emily. We have results to focus on." Taking a deep breath, she met his gaze. "I understand, but if we don't align our metrics with the realities of people, we risk being out of touch. Our data should reflect empathy, and that comes from shared experiences. I want to invite each of you to share a relevant personal experience, no matter how small, that can shape our outreach efforts." A fog of silence descended upon the room. Eyes darted toward each other, uncertain. Emily felt a flicker of panic. Was she asking too much? But then, a young woman named Sarah shifted in her seat, her voice barely rising above a whisper. "I'm not sure this is going to work." "Why not?" Emily countered gently, but with conviction. "We need to understand not just what we're selling, but why our customers matter. Sharing is the first step." The tried-and-true corporate dynamics slowly unraveled as the residual weight of silence lifted. "I guess I can start," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength as she glanced around the table. "Last year, I volunteered for a local organization. Many families in that area feel unheard and overlooked in their needs. It made me realize our campaigns sometimes don't resonate with them." As Sarah spoke, her words sparked something. More stories unfolded, hesitations dissipated, and before long, colleagues who had previously sat on opposite ends of the table were sharing laughter and insights. Emily felt a swell of pride. This connection transcended the barriers of hierarchy. But with each shared experience, the underlying tensions remained palpable. Resentment simmered beneath the surface. Emily sensed Peter's frustration. She didn't know how long he would let this session run before reining it back into the corporate fold. Suddenly, just as a wave of excitement began to crest among her colleagues, Peter leaned in. "Let's focus on deliverables," he cut in brusquely. "This isn't a therapy session. Our clients are not interested in our feelings." The room recoiled as if struck. Faces tightened. Emily's heart sunk. Did he not see the power of this moment? Sharing personal stories had begun to chip away at the organizational walls both Peter and the team had built. Summoning all her courage, Emily stood up straight. "But that's precisely the point, Peter," she declared. "If we ignore the feelings behind the business, we lose sight of our purpose. Our emotions drive our creativity. They can ignite strategies that resonate profoundly." In that charged moment, she realized she was not just fighting for her voice, but advocating for a collective awakening. The air was electric with tension. Would they rally behind her, or would she face the storm alone? The team's collective gaze shifted, grappling with the implications of her words. Would Peter's authoritative stance remain unchallenged? The wheels of a paradigm shift had begun to turn. But as Emily navigated this dangerous intersection of vulnerability and professional duty, she felt the reality of her mission. The resistance might be stronger than expected. As the meeting drew to a close, she sensed a vital turning point had passed, yet the looming question hung heavy. How would she endure the brewing conflict that lay ahead? And could she inspire her team to break beyond the confines of fear and embrace real change? With the adrenaline still coursing through her veins, Emily walked back to her desk, her pulse racing with uncertainty. This was just the beginning. The full confrontation with Peter was yet to come, and she needed to prepare. A decisive battle loomed on the horizon. Emily stared at the document spread across her desk, the weight of her recent revelations sinking deep into her psyche. Turning the chaos she had felt into clarity was no small feat, but she was determined to carry this momentum into her professional life, just as she had with her family. Having successfully navigated the obstacles of the family meeting, Emily understood that her role as a catalyst for change was not confined to her home. During that conversation, she had ignited the first spark of awareness within her family. Now it was time to replicate that success within the corporate walls that had previously confined her voice. With each day that passed following the initial breakthrough meeting, Emily found herself endowed with a sense of purpose that had eluded her for too long. She had delved deep into her personal narrative, harnessing it to breach the emotional walls that had stifled her in both spheres of her existence. Yet she knew that the path ahead was not without its challenges. The echoes of Peter's skepticism still reverberated in her mind. The day of the next team meeting arrived, an event she had anxiously awaited, as both a chance to solidify her earlier successes and a test of her mettle. This time, she decided to take a tactical approach. She had prepared a succinct presentation that seamlessly combined data with personal stories from her colleagues, demonstrating not just the significance of each individual's experience, but the collective impact of their insights on the company's mission. When she entered the conference room, she felt a flicker of nervous anticipation dance through her stomach. She was acutely aware of the scrutiny that would accompany her. Peter sat at the head of the table, his demeanor indicating that he was ready to engage in battle once more. Her colleagues, however, held a different vibe. They seemed more approachable, their previous barriers of skepticism noticeably worn down. "Thanks for joining us today. I'm eager to dive into some experiences that can shape our strategies moving forward," she began, her voice steady and assertive. "Rather than just a presentation, I want this to be a conversation, one where each of us can contribute to creating a narrative that genuinely reflects our community's needs." She gathered the courage to lock eyes with Peter, anticipating his potentially dismissive retorts. Yet, as she continued outlining the importance of blending personal stories with analytical insights, she could sense a shift in the room. The collective energy was different, more engaged, more willing to listen. Perhaps they sensed her conviction, or perhaps they hungered for authenticity in a corporate space often rife with rigid professionalism. The response to her presentation was remarkable. Colleagues began to share their stories openly, some about families they had met during outreach, others about challenges they faced when attempting to connect with customers on a personal level. Their words painted a rich tapestry of experience that illustrated the invisible barriers she had hoped to dismantle. In that moment, Emily recognized how far she had come. The feelings of disconnection that once plagued her now transformed into a chorus of voices echoing support and enthusiasm. Not only were they sharing stories, but they were also offering solutions drawn from their experiences. Just when the atmosphere lightened, Emily felt a familiar tension rising. Peter interjected, skepticism brimming in his voice. "But how do we measure the success of such emotional connections? We instead need hard metrics and results." Emily braced herself. This was the pivotal moment. Standing her ground, she replied, "Peter, while metrics are essential, they should not overshadow the value of empathy. Our customers are individuals with stories, not merely numbers in a report. By integrating both metrics and narratives, we will not only achieve results, but foster loyalty that numbers alone cannot quantify." The room sensed the gravity of her words. She felt the palpable shift positively affecting her colleagues who had witnessed the human side behind the statistics. Recognition bubbled in their expressions, and Emily felt a tide of reassurance washing over her. "I think we could initiate a feedback loop," one of her colleagues, Mark, chimed in. "Let's gather qualitative insights alongside our quantitative data. In fact, I'm willing to lead a pilot study to see how we could implement this." With that, the floodgates opened. Her colleagues began brainstorming actionable steps, each idea contributing to a holistic approach to their outreach efforts. Emily's voice, initially overshadowed by doubt and apprehension, now rang clear, rich with the sound of collaboration and mutual support. As the meeting closed, Emily felt a surge of satisfaction. Leadership wasn't just about asserting her ideas, it was about creating a platform for others to interject their own. Her path had morphed from one of fearful uncertainty to that of recognition and competence. The satisfaction she felt was profound, fulfilling a deep yearning to transform her environment into one of trust, dialogue, and understanding. The day was not merely an achievement, it was a culmination of sweat, tears, and resilience. Looking around the room, she recognized the subtle nods, the fleeting smiles. They were proofs of their collective commitment to change. Emily had successfully connected her personal evolution with professional aspirations, bridging gaps that had once seemed insurmountable. She concluded her day with a distinct realization. The journey toward growth and understanding begins, but it never ends. There would be more meetings, more dialogues to sustain, but now armed with the confidence of her own voice, she knew she could face any uncertainty head-on. This was her moment. She had conquered not only her fears, but also set the stage for a vibrant culture of shared experiences, creating room for diversity in perspective. With finality, Emily understood. Leadership wasn't defined by authority alone. It thrived on empathy, connection, and the courage to embrace discomfort. In the midst of the challenges ahead, one truth remained evident. Emily had arrived, not just as a participant, but as a leader, capable of transforming her world. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. True fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of uplifting our narratives.